and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode's brought to you by Dry Fire Mag. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem of having to rack the slide every time you press the trigger in dry fire training with a pistol. One of the bad habits it took me a long time to break was proper trigger follow-through in dry fire. The Dry Fire Mag will help you eliminate that problem almost immediately. Go buy a Dry Fire Mag and double your training reps in just a few minutes a day at dryfiremag.com.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by Right-On Optics. Right-On is a scope manufacturer, and they specialize in high-quality optics at competitive prices. They're all about customer service, and they're doing great work supporting law enforcement and the veteran communities. So we hope you check them out. You can find them on Right-On Optics. That's RITON optics.com. So, Mike, we got to talk about that last podcast we recorded. So I couldn't help but notice there was a lot of ums and a lot of it's a spectrum. When you end every single thought with, it's a spectrum. We might be irritating or losing our audience. So maybe we can cut those out or we can edit them in post or something. But we got to work on that. Also, just way too many long, dry monologues. If I'm falling asleep, they got to be falling asleep. So fix your shit for next time, man. We can get this right.
Yeah, that's a good call, Jim. Actually, I was going through some edits on that last one, and I also realized that I finished basically every sentence with right or and I do that a lot. And even my wife pointed that out to me. Actually, she was listening to me edit one night, sitting next to me, and she's like, "You say right too much." So that's my bad. That's on me. That's I'll work on getting it right next time, and I'm going to try to work on it. But if I don't, then please call me out and make sure you hold me accountable so I don't miss it. Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you knew this, but you have like the loudest keyboard on the planet. I don't know if you're trying to like signal the space aliens or something through our recordings or what, but it's really freaking distracting. So if you can like unplug that, maybe put it under your bed or something so you don't touch it when we record, that'd be great.
Oh, crap. Yeah, I can fix that. Hang on, I just have to send this email.
Yeah, you're doing it again.
Damn it.
Damn it, Jim. Cut your shit out. So one of the secrets to creating or being part of a high-performing team, whether it means being a member of one or trying to build one, is understanding and contributing to good after-action reviews or good debrief. And this is something that I think every SWAT team in the country has probably had to battle that reputation at one time or another, the mentality that SWAT guys think they're better than everybody. And to be super clear, see, I said like again there, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a spectrum of likes and
now that reputation might be earned. We might deserve that in a lot of cases. But I think that one of the things that happens is after an incident, SWAT guys have a tendency to speak pretty candidly with each other about what happened. And we've kind of built this trust and communication within the room, within our little group, our microcosm, that to someone else who is not used to that or isn't part of our group, it can come across very pointed. And to be clear, SWAT guys are not exempt from basic human decency when it comes to how we interact with people. We should always work hard to be diplomatic and bring people in and make sure that our messages are being conveyed in a clear way that isn't condescending. And that's something that I've always struggled with, if I'm being honest. But that being said, I also have a theory that at least some of this has to do with that culture of being on a high-performing team. Because effective team members are open and honest with each other, and they hold each other accountable. And sometimes, if you get around people who are not inoculated to that sort of organizational behavior, it can absolutely be off-putting. And I've learned that the hard way. But the point that I'm trying to illustrate here is that there is a distinction. And if you can nail down the nuances, you can help your team grow in a way that is difficult to put a price on. Having those good debriefs, good AARs, but not being a dick is an incredibly valuable tool.
And that's easier for some people than others. And we've talked about the tactical personality that sometimes we come across like that. So a little self-awareness will help. And I want to be also clear, this is not exclusive to SWAT, right? One of the things that makes a high-performing team high-performing is the quality of learning that takes place after a critical event, or even really just a training event, right? Your ability as an organization to learn and your ability as an individual to learn makes a big difference as far as your overall performance. And we work in communities that have consequences. In fact, if I had to think about one thing that really ties the military and law enforcement and first responder and personal defense worlds together, it's that, right? It's the fact that if you mess up working at a bank, you might lose your job. If you mess up working at an Olive Garden, you might get someone sick, right? Food poisoning or something like that. And that would be a bummer, but it wouldn't be the end of the world, probably. If you mess up as a cop or a soldier or a paramedic or a concealed carrier, your mistakes might easily result in dead bodies. And we also know we are imperfect people and we're working in an endeavor that demands perfect performance or something very, very close to it. And we're in a competitive situation where losing means dying and where those aren't Nerf bullets, right? Again, consequence. Because of that, we had better freaking learn from our mistakes. And we get better learn from other people's mistakes too, because I ain't going to live long enough to learn all the mistakes myself, right?
Yeah, and it's absolutely not just SWAT. I use that as my example because in terms of being on a team where that's a thing, that's important. But this can apply to an individual patrol squad. It could apply to a fire crew, a fire company. It can apply to the group of guys that you train with at the range, maybe. You guys go to the range on a Saturday afternoon and some guy is doing something that's a little bit unsafe and you go, hey man, something I guess I got to bring to your attention. It's just been bothering me. You could still have a debrief and an after action on something like that, right? It applies universally, but the idea is we're trying to step up our performance collectively in groups because human dynamics are like that. We tend to bunch up, right? We're a group of individuals, but we do very few things as individuals. And even family dynamics can play into this. Having a good teammate as a spouse, which you got to be careful when it comes to debriefing with your wife.
Your wife doesn't need a thorough and candid debrief of her cooking every night, right? We've talked about this before too.
True story. Yeah. But it applies pretty universally. And I just use SWAT as my example, working on a tactical team. But these are principles that you should be able to take across the board.
And as we go through this, think through the different contexts that a debrief will come up, right? There's how you talk to a student after the student does an event, right? Or a trainee after a day in the field, something like that. There is how you handle continuation training, where you're out hacking the mish every day with your dudes, and how you talk about how the day went at the end of the day, or how the mission or the op or whatever. Maybe how you talk to your peers after a really shitty day, right? Things go sideways, you have a bad outcome. That's part of living in this high consequence world, is sometimes you're going to have a really, really bad day. And how you handle the aftermath is part of being a professional. And also think about how you handle the bigger, more formal interagency hot washes and after action reviews, like a full up AAR review that's going to end up documented. Because there's an art and a science to how you do all of that, but be willing to shift gears in terms of how you handle different levels of debrief. And this may come as a shock to you, but some people in the tactical communities have egos.
What?
I know. I think I started realizing this the first time I met a pilot, or the first time I saw a YouTube video of a tactical personality talking about how to shoot a gun right. And as much as I want to pretend like we're all super mature professionals, like it's just ignorant to pretend like egos don't play a role in how we handle calling each other out or getting called out, right? How you learn from mistakes, whether we learn from mistakes, and how you handle coaching. And again, that's a problem in the tactical world is learning how to be coachable is hard for some of us. So we're going to talk about debriefs and after action reviews and the process through which we figure out what the hell just happened and try to acquire and capture and train and proliferate lessons from whatever the hell just happened. So that's the goal of tonight.
And what you have to realize about this, if you want to get performance, not only your own performance, but if you also want to be in one of these high-performing teams or environments, this is like the secret. This is the key.
The secret sauce. It's right here.
Good after action, good debriefs, the way that you work shit out and get into each other's head a little bit on an op or after an op or a deployment or even a game if you do the sports ball thing. It helps you understand what each other is thinking as you go through the op or the mission or the deployment, whatever. And in the future, that is going to help you anticipate their needs and they can anticipate your needs. And this is where all that implicit trust and communication comes from that allows you to operate and make decisions at a faster tempo than your adversary, collectively as a group, not just as individuals, right? And it's hard to overemphasize how important that really is. This is a superpower. If you and your team can see and think and perform in a way that doesn't require you to stop and talk about it and have a huddle or a powwow, you keep everyone focused on their own individual tasks without repeating work that doesn't need to get repeated. Just think about that. Again, even in the context of sports ball, or if I am a manager at a pizza place, right, running a restaurant crew, doing a good debrief or good after action can be the recipe for synergy. And that's the essence of teamwork. It's what makes a team more than just the gathering or group of individuals.
And some of this should sound familiar. This is also like classic textbook Boyd, right? When everyone kind of knows what everyone else is going to do and what the boss is going to need, that gets you the implicit guidance and control that gets you harmony and rapidity and initiative and all the things that make you speed up your decision cycle and actually get a competitive advantage. And that's what we want.
Yep. One thing before we actually get into the content of debriefs is when they should happen. As a general rule, sooner is better than later, right? We want to tackle and understand things while it's still fresh in our mind, and we want to walk away from each individual incident, especially the big ones or the serious ones, knowing the things that we need to carry forward for the next one, because that could be later tonight, it could be tomorrow, it could be in a week, we don't know. But there are limits to that. I accept that there's certainly times where we have to table an entire debrief or parts of the debrief for another time. But at least on some level, you need to understand that the initial debrief should happen soon enough so that people can start to process the incident and what happened.
Yeah, process is a good term on a lot of levels. Bear in mind that we aren't really talking about like critical incident PTSD debriefs. Those have kind of gone out of favor anyway in most cases. But when I have had bad outcomes at work, we did a brief like, what the hell just happened? Is it under control? And what do I need to tell the bosses about it, right? You have to have at least a little bit of talk. And then usually I hand out sheets of paper, sometimes just blank sheets of paper to the guys and say, hey, write down what you remember, write down your key thoughts, what we need to capture right now. Now, I got a caveat that those notes might end up being part of a formal investigation and that might have legal ramifications, but in my experience, it was helpful regardless.
And that's the thing that's come up for us a lot of times if we have an incident that evolves into like an officer-involved shooting or an in-custody death, we might not be able to have that conversation because of that investigation. But it's important that at some point, and to be clear, usually the investigation is going to capture a lot of those things to keep it fresh in the future when we go back and look at it. But at some point, we still should sit down and talk about it. And I know, at least for my organization, we've worked with our commanders and chiefs and the investigative elements to say, okay, we really need to talk about this. Is it safe to talk about now? Like, do you have everything you need? Can we do our thing? And if you communicate why it's important, then hopefully you won't have any issues. But recognize that sometimes the time is just not available. You're just not going to be able to do it. And one of the things you want to be really careful about is just rushing through a debrief. Doing a hurried debrief, I mean, sometimes, like Jim said, there might be those circumstances where you can just go, okay, nuts and bolts of this. What did we really screw up, or what caused or created confusion for us, and what do we need to carry forward as far as the immediate crisis goes. But don't overdo that. Don't understand the limits of that. Doing a good debrief means taking the time to sit down, get all your shit off. If you're wearing a bunch of gear, get out of the heat, get some water, relax, and actually start to debrief and process this.
Yeah. And it's tricky. Just like Mike said, in my world, the debrief is always at the end of a very long day. Dudes want to go home. They need to fill out paperwork. They need to go to sleep and reset for their next mission. And that's one of the reasons it's important to be efficient and organized when you do debrief, right? Don't waste everybody's time just talking to hear yourself talk. Walk in knowing the key points and hit the key points, and you have to actively facilitate and moderate it. Otherwise, it just becomes a waste of everybody's time. And then what the hell's the point, right?
And having someone that can lead this and moderate it, that person needs to be able to recognize where you reach that point of diminishing returns.
Yep.
Like, the debrief's no longer doing us any good. People are exhausted. These are the things that I really want people to walk away from this, and that's it. That's enough. You can kind of scale this to the incident. Sometimes we work like a barricaded fugitive. Guy holds up in his house. He doesn't want to come out. We're going to get him out. Like, we're going to help him, right? It usually involves tear gas and breaking stuff and robots, and it's awesome. But anyone who was there, that's a slow and methodical process. It takes hours, usually. Hours and hours and hours. And if you were there for it, most of the time, you have a pretty good idea what happened. It's pretty straightforward. So you could kind of scale this to, when is there something that we really need to talk about and get into? And what are the times that we could just do a quick recap and see if any issues came up that we hadn't already identified or we weren't aware of, and go for the rest of it another time. And sometimes there are little things that come up. Sometimes there was something that, I got one thing. Why was it that such and such a commander had such a problem with us wanting to break out a window and fill the place with tear gas? Like, what was the deal? And maybe there's some communication breakdown that some of us weren't privy to that, okay, well, here was the rationale. That makes sense. I understand why we had to wait. All right, fine. The investigators wrote the warrant in a certain way. Okay, sometimes we just need to get stuff off our chest. But having that person that can kind of run the show and help you scale your debrief can still make it be effective, even if you don't want to spend all day in there. So getting into the meat and potatoes of a good debrief, one of the first attributes to look for is that a good debrief has to be thorough. And I know that kind of is contrary to what I just started talking about, which is sometimes you're going to scale it down, right? But that shouldn't be the everyday practice. That shouldn't be the rule. The rule should be thorough, detailed, complete debriefs, right? That should be the general practice. And the details matter. At the very start of this, for example, if I'm using a SWAT scenario, our team leaders are usually going to start the debrief with, I got a phone call from Sergeant so-and-so in patrol, and they told me X. It starts at the very beginning.
Yeah. We should probably do that more in the military. I don't get to decide, like, was it a good mission? We probably should talk about that more. Right. But that ends up, questioning the bosses, that sort of thing. But it might be worthwhile to say, how did this mission come to be? How did it get to us? And were we the right asset to use for it?
Yeah.
And that's tough. And it gets kind of emotional about, well, of course we're the right asset because we're us. It's like, maybe not, right? Especially when you talk about special teams.
Yeah, it sets the stage, right? It's the context. And for SWAT scenarios, you have to justify calling the SWAT team, right? Because we're going to show up with our machine guns and our tanks and all of our military gear or whatever. And so that requires a level of justification in and of itself. And so the stuff that gets conveyed in that phone call is setting the stage and giving us a read of the situation to go with. Because quite frankly, in a lot of the scenarios that a SWAT team gets called, the level of force that I could justify to take that bad guy into custody, we're talking usually about more serious bad guys. You've already changed the scope of our response just by calling us, right? So you might also find that once you get everyone in the room and you start talking about it, that something was maybe miscommunicated or misconveyed or there was some misinformation about what actually happened.
And we've talked about this in the past, right? Talking about Ruby Ridge and Waco, that in some cases, the nature of the threat was way overblown, and that got you the big, way overblown response, right? You got some priming occurred. And this is your opportunity to capture that.
And priming is actually exactly the phenomenon that I'm getting into, because this doesn't have to just deal with SWAT, right? It could deal with, this could relate to 911 calls. It's an important step in understanding where the breakdowns were. For a 911 call, you go from a caller to a call taker. They take little data bursts, little snapshots of information without tone of voice, without emotion tied into it. They type it into a computer that gets read over a radio in robot speak to another group of people. Those people make their own interpretation and assessment of it. We're literally playing the telephone game. And it's hard to convey not only the emotion and tone of voice stuff, but also just the credibility of the information that you're getting when you play that telephone game and it exchanges hands that many times. So it's a good opportunity to sit there and start going, okay, from the stage setting, dispatch priming, I got a phone call point of view, where did we start to get bad information or a bad assessment of the problem?
Yeah, and my version of this starts with asking the question, what did we know going into it, and what do we wish we knew? What questions should we have asked, and were they knowable, right? Sometimes in a military conflict, there's no real way that your intel guy is going to find out exactly what the bad guys were up to. But man, if they knew something and we didn't think to ask them, that's a problem. And this stage setting is kind of a good opportunity to say, what did we know? What should we have known? And where did we need to clarify during the planning and prep, right?
I really like that. One of the things, I watched a military unit do some training exercises a while back, and they had, when they were doing their mission planning, they had like a separate whiteboard, and it was requests for information.
RFI.
Questions that they wanted to ask. RFIs, yeah.
Yep.
And the same thing happens when a SWAT team leader gets a phone call from a sergeant somewhere. There's certain questions that they're asking, right? But this is where, in a debrief, is where we capture, was there a question that we should have asked? Was there a follow-up that we needed to include that we missed, right? And it's not, it doesn't stop at just the phone call. That can go throughout the incident. There might be questions that we should have asked or that we want answered in the future, but start capturing it there, right? So what we're looking for when we do this stage setting, when we start to understand the context of this sort of thing, what we have to remember about a lot of incidents like this is that problems have a tendency to cascade on themselves, right? So when you have a misunderstanding about what it is that we're doing here or why we're here in the first place, everything that comes after that might be impacted. So it kind of speaks just to the importance of why we start there. Now, once we have a clear idea of what we're getting ourselves into and what the actual mission or objective is going to be, then part of the debrief needs to be digging into the plan and then taking the whole thing apart piece by piece. And each person starts to go through their role, what they saw, and what they did. And you want to kind of pick that apart piece by piece so that you don't miss over major stages of the operation, because it's easy to go down a rabbit hole here.
Oh, yeah. And fight the urge to make this too scripted, right? It's a little like asking someone how their day is. You don't want fine, and you don't want the second-by-second play-by-play of what they ate and the style they use to wrap up the toilet paper when they wipe their ass in the porta potty. Right? There's a level of detail you don't need. And this is one of the tricky parts, and something Mike alluded to earlier, is you have to be succinct and efficient with a debrief, but you also have to be thorough enough to cover what matters, right? And this is the art and science. This is keeping opposing ideas in your head at the same time without going crazy, which is you got to be thorough, but not too thorough. We want it at an 8, not at a 12, right? That's a recurring theme, as we dial in this spectrum. Another thing I want to sort out at the very beginning, as we're setting the stage, is the basic questions. Were we successful or not? Did we meet our objective and get everyone out safe? If not, why not? Right? If the answer is no, I need to understand why. We got to figure out the causal factors and the contributing factors. And there's an art and a science to that, and you can do like a fishbone diagram or a wishbone diagram, or I don't know, some shit they taught me in management school back in the day. But at the end of the day, think about what made this go wrong. And sometimes it's really obvious, like, oh, Bobby screwed up. That's why it went wrong. Well, you got to go a layer past that. Why did Bobby screw up? Is it because Bobby's out of his depth? Is it because we didn't train Bobby? Is it because we gave him conflicting directions? Is it because his equipment sucked and we need better equipment? So you need to go a level or two past, yeah, Bobby screwed up.
Yeah, one thing you have to consider too about did we meet our objective is, did the objective change?
Oh, yeah.
Or did we lose focus on our objective? And this is something that, I'll give you an example that we've dealt with in the past is you go to a call where this is a wanted fugitive and he has barricaded himself in his apartment. And he's in there with his girlfriend and his 3-year-old child, and he's threatening to harm them. Well, the focus at that point isn't to arrest him, right? It's to get the girlfriend and the kid out. He's threatening to harm them. They are hostages. This is a hostage scenario, not just a barricaded fugitive scenario. And sometimes that can be more difficult to differentiate than people want to admit. Just because his girlfriend and his kid are in there doesn't mean that they're hostages if he's not necessarily going to hurt them, right? It does change the dynamic of the scenario, but if there's no suggestion that they're in any danger, then it might kind of scope things. But the idea is that objective needs to be crystal clear in people's head, that it's not about arresting this guy. It's about getting them out safely. Now, let's say he lets them out. Well, now the objective changed, right? Now this is an arrest operation. And the rules changed, right? The whole game changed when we got the wife and kid out safely.
And this is a key tactical trait, is the adaptability to recognize when the situation has changed. And one of the things you got to debrief is if someone doesn't keep up with that is a key point you want to try to identify is, hey, buddy, we shifted gears. Where were you? Right?
Yep. And this is, I mean, I've seen people get distracted by this, where we start working this scenario as if it's just a criminal apprehension thing. And we have to sometimes remind people that, hey, just to be super clear, like I'm not really concerned about him right now. I'm a lot more concerned about the safety of these two people. And so it's really important to be super, super clear about what your objective is and make sure that everyone's on the same page about that. And if that changes, or if we get distracted, those are good points to dig into for a debrief. So as you start picking this thing apart and everyone's going over what they saw, what they did, what their responsibilities were, sometimes it's important to ask tough questions. And when I said earlier that details matter, what I mean by that is sometimes someone's going to talk about what they did. Oh, so I was getting set up in my position in the alley over here, and I had this equipment, and then this happened, and so I did this thing, and so then so-and-so said something. Hold on a second. Go back. What? Say what happened again? And you did what now? Right? Go back. Don't just gloss over stuff.
You were in the alley? Who put you in the alley?
Right. You might need to go back and cover some important details and understand the thought process behind why they did what they did. Did they go off script? Was that what they were supposed to be doing? Was whatever information, if something changed, did they relay that to people? Like, cover those details. Don't let that stuff go unnoticed. Don't just gloss over those things. And it doesn't mean that they did anything wrong. It doesn't mean that they're in trouble, but those are important details that we want to make sure that we cover. Now, in the course of that, you might get the whole debrief might get off track for a second, right? And you might go down a little rabbit hole. And trust me, I've been in the room for some pretty passionate debates. I've probably participated.
The technical term for that is a motherfucker calling contest.
Yeah.
No, motherfucker, that's not how it went. Oh, but yes, it is how it went, motherfucker.
Yeah. I've seen that, and up to and including times where some of the senior guys need the room for a minute.
Yep.
And then we'll bring everyone back in and cover this another way. But the whole point of this is you don't want to just gloss over that stuff, right? And if you go down one of these little rabbit holes or passionate debates or motherfucker contests, that's okay, right? Sometimes we have to hash that stuff out, and that's important. And it's part of, we all need to walk out of there friends with each other still, right? Or at least
mostly.
Close
you got to be able to work together, right?
Right, yeah. But, this is why it also helps to have someone kind of run or moderate the debrief, because at some point, there needs to be a sober adult that can bring us all back down to planet Earth, right? So there's details worth diving into. There's debates worth having. And sometimes we have to put stuff to bed, and that's where your team leader or moderator or whatever commander can help find that balance. But make sure that the important things that need to be revisited still get revisited, because it's going to ultimately come up again. Usually when those kind of things happen, it's not an isolated incident, or it's not going to be an isolated incident, right?
Yeah, I like that point. And we're going to get into this further as we go, but when you are hitting that recurring problem, maybe it's time to not just handle it in the debrief room. Maybe it's time to write it down, right? Write a memo, put it in the training guide or in the standards and practices or whatever it is your organization calls the manual. Put it in the manual so you don't keep making the same mistakes over and over and over.
Yeah, something that actually just recently we started, our team leaders started sending out all the after actions. They're all stuck in a computer file or binder or something somewhere.
SharePoint. In our world, it's all on SharePoint. Oh, you didn't read the SharePoint? I don't know. There's 97,000 pages on my SharePoint.
Right.
No, I haven't read them. I'm sorry. I suck. My bad.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is they all exist. We have them, but not necessarily everyone goes back and looks over them, right? And so just recently they've started like emailing them out as they happen. And so it's just part of your email. You can click through and see at least the bullet points, right? The big things that we need to take away from it. And I think that's important. I think that's useful.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to have a baseball bat in my office in tactics, and it said it's on SharePoint on it. So if someone said that to me, I was going to pull the baseball bat on it just to show them some love. As far as keeping people on track, in some flying units, in fact, a lot of flying units, there's actually a scripted debrief guide, right? That says the aircraft commander or the mission commander or the pilot in command, whatever you want to call it, is going to get up and is going to cover this and this and this, the motherhood and the planning and the timeline and sequence of events that the facilitator has to follow. But remember that a lot of debriefs are really teaching opportunities, right? And if you lose your audience just ticking off items on a checklist, you're not really teaching. And this is part of that art and science of figuring out how thorough to be. There might be some guys you need to be really thorough as far as your teaching. There's some guys you need to make it a little faster and funnier. You got to read the room and have some self-awareness. So as you walk into the debrief after the mission, in your head, start thinking about what you're going to cover and maybe get like no more than 3 key lessons that you need everybody in the room to walk away knowing, right? Because it's a teaching opportunity. Now, as for rabbit holes, there are a couple different ways you can take that. One is you don't get to identify a problem without bringing me a solution. You don't get to say the plan sucked, especially if you were sitting there during the planning. You got to speak up. You don't get to say the comms sucked, which is true after every critical incident ever. You got to tell me exactly what to do about it. Do we need to change our brevity, like the code words we use? 10-200 sounds too much like 10-201 or whatever, right? Or you said pig away, and we don't like it when you say pig away. It has to be weapon away, even though the brevity guide says something else, right? You have to tell us what to do about it. What do we need to change? Do we need to change the plan? Do we need to fix the radios? What do we need to fix about the radios? And if someone wants to keep going down a rabbit hole, that in my mind is them volunteering for an assignment. Give them homework. Hey, you think the radios suck. In a week, I want you to come back to me and tell me exactly what we need to do about them and exactly how much it's going to cost and exactly what vendor we need to use.
I hereby dub thee the chairman of the committee.
That's right. And there's value to that, again, because it's a teaching moment. They need to maybe understand how the radios got that way. And maybe we as a group don't understand, and we need that guy to go do that deep dive. The other thing with kind of staying on track is once you have conveyed a lesson, you don't have to keep reconveying it over and over and over and over to the same guy in the same debrief. Right? At some point, you're just beating up on a guy. And a lot of tactical personalities, we fixate. We get wrapped around an axle. And we just want to harp on a thing. And like, you got to recognize diminishing returns. And when, okay, the guy got the message. He's going to put his landing gear down next time. Cool. Let's move on.
Next thing.
Right.
Yeah. I really like the homework assignment. Like put the guy on the committee, right?
Yeah.
You could go investigate and sort that problem out.
Thank you for volunteering. Go ahead and call Boeing and get that fixed.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we should probably do more often, and we do it when in certain instances, but we should probably do it more often, is recreate scenarios, which we do. But I think where we fall short is we should recreate them with the purpose of testing two different courses of action specifically, like. I should have done X, but instead I did Y. What if I did Y, right? And actually test outcome, course of action A, course of action B, to see what ways it might have played out differently.
And there's some juice versus squeeze here. Do you have to do an actual live action role play replay of this thing? Probably not. But you can at least draw out the diagram of the operational environment and walk through it or tape it out. And one of the biggest tech advances in the last, 50 years has been video cameras. And you can hit replay on a lot of this. The body-worn camera, hit play on it, and hey, what did you actually see? Right? If you're not recording what you're doing for the purposes of debrief, like when you call a big company and they're like, this call is recorded for quality assurance, like go ahead and hit play on the call. Find out how you sounded on the radio. Find out, did you go left or do you just think you went left, right?
Yeah. I think following like a regimented guide, like a debrief guide or a script, sure, I'm sure that plays a role somewhere, but the formality of your debrief needs to have, and this is what Jim was talking about, reading the room, right?
Yeah.
If I'm having a debrief with that maybe is external, that is involving all the different figureheads of different organizations that were involved, that is going to have a different playbook than if I'm in the room with my guys and, we're having a talk with, it's me and my boys, and we're talking about what happened. That might be a little bit less formal because those lines of communication are open, the trust is there, the culture is there. And so it might not necessarily have like a guide or a template, but it might still have a flow to it, just a basic format. Does anyone have anything for the plan? Does anyone have anything for the briefing? Like, how was my briefing? That's something that's come up. We've had TLs who recently promoted a sergeant. They're new on the team. They're back as a sergeant instead of just an officer. And they might say, hey, this is my bad. I'm still getting my rhythm down on the briefing. I should have been more clear about X. I should have accounted for Y. Thank you to so-and-so for reminding me that we needed to take this on the op or that I needed to assign someone to this. Those things are all, you could take it kind of piece by piece and at least have a flow to it, right? But again, you have to read the room like Jim was saying. So I talked about the lines of communication and the trust, and Jim talked about the idea in the beginning that we all have egos, right?
Impossible.
And this part of debriefs is a tough one, and it can be highly contested at times, but you'll hear people say things like, you need to check your ego at the door. And when we go into debriefs, It's an open forum. There's no rank. Position isn't a factor. Everyone has a say. Everyone gets a voice. Those things are true. I think those are important.
Yeah. With
However,
a big asterisk.
yeah. However, it is not a blank check. It doesn't mean you get to be a dick. It doesn't mean you get to be disrespectful. We're all still supposed to be on the same team. Be cool to each other, right? That's an important attribute to be after.
Yeah. So, there's a big asterisk with, check your rank and your ego and your position at the door. That is true. You need to be able to be candid, but that doesn't mean you need to be a twerp about it, right? Not long ago, I was dealing with a youngin' in the organization. And he was really excited that was part of being a high performing team. His rank doesn't matter. And I got to call a colonel ass face or something like that. And I was like, dude, when we tell you rank doesn't matter, that's what we tell suckers. It never doesn't matter, right? You have to read the room. You have to understand who you're talking to. And you can be respectful and dignified and professional and say, sir, next time I need you to put your landing gear down. Or,
that'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be great. And you can do that on a high performing team. You should be able to do that without having like that halo effect phenomena of, well, he's a big boss, so he doesn't make mistakes, or I'm not allowed to tell him he made a mistake. You can tell them they made a mistake. What you don't get to do is berate them over it, right?
Yeah. And this is all the check your ego at the door thing, and rake isn't a factor. Again, the intent here is open lines of communication. It's not you get to say whatever you want. You still need to effectively communicate, right? And it leads us to the next important truism of a good debrief, and that is, if you don't call yourself out, someone else will.
Yep.
And so this is something that is fueled by the culture of your organization, and that does not happen in a vacuum, right? And if you are the highest ranking guy in the room or the leader of that organization, you should be leading that debrief with the things that you screwed up, knowing full well that one of your guys is going to point it out for you if you don't, right? And so this is where it's kind of a feedback loop sort of thing, right? Where it has to go both ways, right? If you made a mistake on the op, you're just dying for the opportunity in the debrief to get that out, get it off your chest, because you owe it to your teammates to own it, right? And there's a big difference to Jim's point earlier about just shitting on the new guy and being a dick, and having a high level of accountability in your organization and high expectations. And one of the ways to maintain that is to make sure that you give people an opportunity to admit to their mistakes, and if they don't, then you address it. And you don't have to be a dick about it. You could do it in the form of a question, right? Hey, what was going on with this? And kind of give them an easy opening for it, but it's part of getting past those defense mechanisms and having a candid discussion.
Yeah. There are a lot of ways you can start that conversation, right? You can start with, what did we learn tonight? Right?
Yeah.
As the guy's picking shrapnel out of his arm or whatever. And I actually like that. I'll go around the table. Hey, give me something you messed up today, right? I'll just put it point blank. Or I'll start with, hey, this is what I messed up. This was the single biggest mistake I made. I'm sure we'll talk about others, but this concerned me, and I'm going to fix it for next time, right? And what this comes from is we want operators of all forms who are self-aware enough to know when they've made a mistake, right? That's a level of inspired learning that you need everybody on the team to have is, yep, I messed that up, right? You want them to be able to fix it when they do, but you need them to be able to recognize it. And I first learned about this when I was a kid watching a video about the Blue Angels. And they were talking about, what makes the Blue Angels special, because we're naval aviators, and we're special because we're naval aviators, is how they do debriefs. It's a big point of pride for them. And they go around the table at the end of their sortie and they self-identify. And once they do, that mistake is kind of like off limits. No one gets to harp on it once you identify it. And they refer to that as safeties. That was my safety error, right? And so it's kind of their tradition. Go around the table. Hey, I was late on the left aileron roll to music. I'll fix my safeties, boss. I'm glad to be here. And that's kind of like their thing. In fact, we have a capture of that audio. I'm going to play it for you because I think it's worth listening to how they do that.
After every flight, the team also goes through a critical debriefing process, which they consider as important as the actual flight itself. They hash out what worked, what didn't, and no punches are pulled.
We are wide open as we can possibly be to criticisms, and we want to become our own worst critics.
We debrief everything. I'll tell you how specific it gets. We even debrief the march to our airplanes and the march back. So, and you get picked on for every little thing. And most of us haven't marched in 10 years of being in the Navy, so they get very, very specific.
The debriefing process takes probably twice as long as the flight took itself. Rank doesn't come into play, experience levels, those are good, but you have to set those aside when the criticism starts to come, because that's the only way you're going to learn the maneuver, and that's the only way you're going to get to where the maneuver looks good and it's safe.
I think I was a little bit late dropping you guys off, so we're a little low going over the crowd. But other than that, smooth air was nice, a little bumpy in the spots, but glad we went flying. Glad to be here. Pleasure.
Sure, boss, I'm glad we went flying too. Turned out nice. And I had a couple safeties on the left echelon flat pass coming over. I didn't acknowledge the go diamond call. Just concentrating on where I was going and how quick my movement was going to be. Then I was 20 feet low on the low brake cross, 280 feet, and I can fix all those things. So glad to be here.
All these things are called safeties, or things that were safety problems or violations from our standards.
Had safety coming back in. For some reason, I thought we were going right 45s to park. And then I even called turning left when we were turning right. So it went pretty good for me up until we got there. I was just happy to be here and glad to be here.
We have a term that we use, glad to be here. And the term is, I'm Pat Rainey, an average pilot, literally. And I'm, no kidding, just lucky enough to be in the Blues. And that's where that term comes from, to the boss. Hey, I'm glad to be here, because there's guys out in the Mediterranean Sea tonight, out in the Persian Gulf, landing on a ship at night, taking care of us. And so I kind of carry a little bit of the fleet with me, so guys can walk around and say, hey, look, it's the Blue Angels, they represent us.
We have really good tapes, videotapes that we look at, and the tape can be stopped, it can be reversed, slowed, played back, and we do a lot of that, and that's how we get toward the levels of performance that we want. We have two critiquers on the ground that look at the maneuvers and tell us their impressions, basically, from where the maneuvers were placed and how it looked to them.
You guys did a good job with that placement. Looked really well today for the conditions. Glad to be here, boss.
Get a nice one-plane look before the center point, and then okay, smoke off.
When we make these mistakes and we fess up to them, and we do it every time we fly, it's just an extremely important aspect of what we do. What we do after we've said it is, I made this mistake and I'll fix it. You always say that you're going to fix it. And what that leaves the rest of us with the feeling is that you've recognized your mistake and you're going to take corrective action not to let it happen again. So it doesn't drop our confidence level in another person in the formation.
If you don't take it seriously and don't debrief, if you ever get complacent, you're going to kill yourself or you're going to kill somebody else. Now, you got to be able to learn each and every time you go flying, because there's never been the perfect flight demonstration yet that the Blues have ever put on. So we're always looking to perfect it.
All that preparation continues to pay off, and the team wanted to be at their best for the upcoming tour of Europe. The Blues may never fly the perfect air show, but it sure is fun watching them try.
So I really like that. I think that there's a good message to be had there, which is we want self-aware operators. We want thorough, candid debriefs, and there should be some way to self-identify so it's not just, the new guy getting beat up, but actually learning a lesson, right? I also like that message of, hey, I'm glad to be here. Like, recognize you are on a high-performing team. Recognize that means something. And you have to fight every day to stay on that team and advance on that team and earn your spot on that team every single day. There's a message there. So I'm a fan.
Yeah, and that it's that this is why we are high performing. This is what made us that, is doing this sort of thing. So candid, closed door debriefs are no holds barred. We're going to be judgy. We might question or interrogate or attack the way that people do things, because one of the ways that we deal with our dirty laundry is by airing it. And we work those things out and we make sure that they don't happen in the future, because the mission is too important to screw up. We have to get this right. And like we said, when we walk out of there, we're all friends, we're all on the team, and we might get called right back into the fight like in an hour. So we need to work that out and have it squared away and out in the open so that we can learn from it. You know, our team we've made mistakes and people know it. And we accept those mistakes on behalf of the team, right? We don't blame like, oh yeah, that was because Jim did X. No, yeah, we screwed that up. And I should be looking at ways that I could help prevent or stop that error from happening in the future.
Yeah. And depending on how you're kludged as a team, you may need to actually verbalize some of this stuff at the beginning, right? Get people in the right kind of headspace. Hey, look, dudes, we need to sit down and talk about how tonight went. Let's set rank and shit outside. Let's get a beer. Let's settle in, right? That stage setting is a big part of it. You don't have to do that every single, sortie or every single raid. But especially when things didn't go right and you do need to do that real serious, thorough, soul-searching debrief, like that's where you kind of have to do it.
And you'll know them. This is going back to Jim's thing about reading the room. You'll know them when they come. There'll be those ones that you know that, all right, this is a pretty standard op. Nothing went terribly wrong. We can just hit the highlights and probably move on, versus the ones that like, all right, well, that got weird. Let's... we got some shit to talk about on this one, but the idea is that this is an ownership thing. My goal or my intent as a member of the team is to contribute to the success of the team. So if one of my buddies screwed up, then I should be looking at ways that I could have helped them out, that I could be part of the solution there. And I certainly don't want to make that mistake again, the mistake that he just made if he did screw something up. But we have to take that forward with us. And sometimes there are other people involved. Sometimes someone outside of our team had something to do with it. We got bad information, or a commander did something, or another team that we were working with did something. We're not here to fix them necessarily, right? We're here to fix ourselves and to deal with our own shit and make sure that our shit's locked down tight. And there's times where the team leaders or the leadership, the command staff or whatever, might need to go sit those other guys down and talk about some concerns, or maybe just a lateral like team leader to team leader thing. Hey, just so you know, there was some concerns about this. I just wanted to let you know that it came up. No hard feelings on our side. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of it. That can happen externally in a diplomatic way at a different level. But what we're talking about is making sure that our shit's wired tight. And one of the big benefits that come from having that kind of closed door debrief and not going around blaming people is that you build that trust with each other. And that lets you be a little bit more vulnerable with each other. And I know that sounds warm and fuzzy, but it's important to make sure that everyone can communicate in a way that's like, look, Jim's got my back. He's not going to go to another podcast and talk a bunch of shit about how I ruined our podcast, because we have accepted as a team that the success of this is a mutual thing. And so that's what lets us have these conversations about making it good and making it excellent and taking it to the next level. So when you get those lines of trust, those lines of communication opened up, it's a lot easier to be effective about pointing out each other's mistakes. And that's where the ego and rank thing starts to get set aside a little bit. And one of the things I've always talked about with the best bosses that I've had is I'm never worried about the formal discipline as much as I am about disappointing dad.
Yep.
And that's the relationship that you want within your team. Is that like, hey, at the end of the day, like, hey, if I did something wrong and I'm going to take a hit for it, discipline wise, like that's cool. But are we good? You know, like I made a mistake. This is what happened. I want to make sure we're good. I think that's an important way of looking at it. That being said, those little defense mechanisms are going to pop up here and there. You're going to still have the ego creep in, and making sure that you have that culture of accountability and focusing on problem solving and focusing on not being a dick and communicating well is going to help you break down past those things. We all got them. We got to recognize them, work around them, and not let them become a bigger thing than they should be. Ways you can do that. You can word, and I kind of talked about this a little bit. I touched on it, but one way is you can word a question or a criticism in a way that is open-minded to their thought process. Give them a way out. Like, hey, what were you seeing back there that led you to X? I wasn't there. I'm just curious what you saw.
We do this at work a lot. I'm not second guessing you. Well, I guess I am. What were you thinking when you did this? But at least, you can be honest about it. Depending on the level of your relationship or rapport, you can do that. Right?
Yeah. But the idea is like two things. One is if you need to hit him with criticism, if you're going to call him out, then that's okay. That's what we're here for, right? But make sure that you give them a way out. Give them a chance to explain themselves. Maybe they had a reasonable explanation. And maybe you'll still have to go back and say, like, I like where your head's at, but no.
So we have a rule book, and the rule book says thou shalt do this.
Right.
Yeah.
And it sounds silly, but another way is you can sandwich criticism with praise. I know that like this is like one of those little leadership lessons that sounds kind of foofy. But it's something as simple as this, like, hey, Officer Jim, good job taking initiative. I like that you were eager and you were looking for work. Just remember that if your job is X, Y, and Z, it's important to stick to that because of X, Y, and Z, right? You're still kind of giving him a kudos for like being for his enthusiasm.
A for effort. At least you tried.
Right.
Yeah.
But so you're not trying to knock him down like, hey man, I appreciate your effort, but here's the thing.
Yeah. I've heard a variation on sandwiching recently that you have to give 5 positives for every negative, or they'll never even hear the positives.
You might be crossing a line here.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to set down my, men are from Mars, trainees are from Venus or whatever. And let's just talk. Right. And personally at my level, I've had a lot of formal schooling and leadership, and I know when someone is doing stuff they learn in formal leadership school, like when they pat my shoulder and they call me by my first name, which I don't ever go by, I that's usually a sign. Like, okay, well, just tell me. Like, we don't need to do this. So some things I want you to consider as far as like the social engagement, as far as how you.
I got something on that.
Yeah.
Last point before you go on to this. The key in that, making that effective and not just, patronizing somebody, is being genuine about it. Like, the key is in your attitude.
Yeah.
Are you actually being open-minded? Are you actually glad about certain aspects of their performance that you can appreciate? I mean, if you're genuine and authentic about it, you don't have to like, okay, I'm going to put on my bullshitting face right now. Like, it doesn't have to be like that.
No. And if anything, it's much more effective just to be honest and say, hey, you messed this up, fix it for next time. Like, it's kind of, if you want to look at management and leadership styles, there's a concept called 1 minute manager. Just give the quick feedback and then move on with your life. That in a lot of ways is easier than this long drawn out, okay, well, I think you're really a good person, but maybe I wouldn't have tried that. You could just say, hey dude, don't do that next time. Hey, keep your finger off the trigger till you're ready to fire. We got rules around here. That's one of them. Don't break it. Next. Right? A couple other points, the things that I want you to consider is know what critiques are important for the whole room to hear and which ones are better within special teams. Like maybe on an air crew, just the pilots need to go off and talk pilot stuff, or maybe on a SWAT team, just the snipers need to go off and talk sniper stuff, right? Or the breachers or whatever. So that's one option. And some discussions are better for the hallway. Like, hey, why don't you and I go talk about this offline? Particularly calling out bosses. I make a point. I'm there to support my boss, right? So I'm usually not going to call out my boss for funsies, especially if I really disagree with the decision he made. I'm still going to tell him that if we have a good relationship, we'll go into a dark corner and I'll say, hey, so you hosed me on that. Let's not do that. But I'm not going to undercut him in front of the dudes, right? That's part of what I owe him is public support. So as candid as I want to be, I'm not going to pull his feet out from under him if I can help it. Another thing on the social stuff is if you're getting called out, you're the one taking the debrief, receiving the debrief. About the worst thing you can do is argue with it. Like, don't do that. You do not have to stand up and defend yourself. If someone is taking the time and the effort and the social capital to try to coach you, have the professionalism and the dignity to shut up, listen, and write it down. And it is amazing how many people don't take notes in debrief. That's how we don't learn lessons from debrief, right? You got to write it down.
Yeah, and that's coming up here pretty soon. But I do want to talk just a little bit more about the content of the debrief, which is the basic core questions that we need to talk about, right? The basic core questions of any debrief are what went right, what went wrong, and what we're going to do different in the future.
Key questions. One thing I want you to do is walk into the debrief already having those things kind of sorted out. The real discussion comes in if there isn't consensus about what those answers are. What went right, what went wrong, and what we'll do different.
Well, and not only what they are, but also why or how they happened.
Causal and contributing factors, right?
Like we all agree that X was screwed up, but how do we get there?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, it was this. No, it actually was because of this. Right now, we have to. There's some points of discussion.
Yep.
And there's been a number of times where something got weird on the op, and I've gone into the debrief with questions.
I have questions.
I have a number of questions, and what the hell was that about, right? Like, but everyone can more or less know what went wrong, but it's important to sort out how we got there. And this is going back to your attitude, not going in the room to scold anybody or because you're pissed off or you want to vent or you're frustrated, but a genuine curiosity and a desire to understand why we went down a certain path. Your attitude goes a long way in this. And everyone in the room's attitude goes a long way with this. Jim and I were talking on the phone the other day about some work stuff. And one of the things that we were talking about is people listen to respond, not to understand.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And if you're going into the debrief, listening to someone tell their side of the story, and you're just thinking about what you're going to say to them next, you're doing it wrong. Right? Understand the shoes that they were standing in when they made their decision, right? And then process and think about it and respond to those things.
Oh, another thing about that is about leaving rank outside, right? There's a hierarchy in every organization. Every group has a pecking order, and there's the rank pecking order and the position authority pecking order and the I've been around for 20 years pecking order and the social, like I'm the cool guy and you're not the cool guy, or I'm the high performer and you're not the high performer. Shut up and listen. It doesn't matter. If someone's got a point to make in the debrief, if they're taking the effort to make a point, shut up and listen. And it is very frustrating, particularly when you're the new guy and maybe you know something the other idiots in the room don't know. And if you're going to be the guy who speaks up, everyone else in the room owes you at least listening. Now, you have to balance that a little bit. Odds are not good that everyone in the room's an idiot but you, right? So you have to apply some common sense and judgment and social awareness and self-awareness and say, maybe I can couch this. Hey guys, I realize I'm new here, but I couldn't help but notice that y'all run around with your fingers on the trigger. My experience based on this and this and this is maybe that's going to cost us someday. Have we thought about maybe not running around with our fingers on the trigger? And they might be like, oh, shut up, new guy. You must be from county or whatever. Or you must be from the C-17 or whatever. Like,
this is my safety.
Yeah. And I've seen stuff like that. I'm sure Mike's seen stuff like that. And like,
yeah,
you got to listen. You got to, listen to understand. Listen with your ears. That's why God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth or 1 nose or whatever the hell it is he gave us. Like, listen.
Well, and as the senior guy or the team leader or commander or the boss or whatever, it's also important to remember that if you're trying to instill this culture where everyone has a voice, everyone can speak up, open, candid, honest debriefs, no holds barred, right?
Put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. When that guy starts talking, you want to encourage that. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to he's going to lob you a softball and you're going to just, no, stuff it, right? Like, but it does mean that you should be aware of what they're trying to do. And like we're saying, listen to understand, then respond, right? In an appropriate way. But your attitude makes a big difference. Even if you know that you have something to attack, right? Even if you know you have a criticism, just be constructive about it, right? Have an open mind, be willing to listen, and point it out in a constructive way. And where this is really important is even when things went right. And this is where we really start to identify the luck is not a tactic thing. You've heard that on the show a number of times, probably, if you've been listening. Things can go right. We want to understand why they went right. Was it because the guy just decided to not fight or run or shoot at us? Or was it because we actually did something that made a difference in that regard?
And this is really tricky, right? Because our brains are not wired to take lessons from good outcomes. Our brains are wired to only notice when we lose. It hurts when we lose. We're competitive people. So when you win, you get that little dopamine hit of, oh yeah, we're awesome. We're rock stars. Did you win because you were doing the right things, or did you win because you got lucky? Just like Mike said, luck's not a tactic. And in the flying world, I've seen this many, many times where we did something, we got away with it, and we conclude, well, that thing is safe. No, driving without your seatbelt on isn't safe. Driving without your seatbelt on is stupid. You got away with it because you didn't happen to have a wreck that time, right?
There is I'm going to misquote this, so I'll try to keep it brief. But there was a study where people went to like a conference or an expo, and they gave them a free coffee mug, and then they offered to buy the coffee mug. They said it was worth this many dollars, but they offered to buy it for like half that. And people that weren't getting what it was worth were unwilling to give up that amount of money, even though that there would still be more money than they had for the coffee mug that cost them nothing.
That's a well-known economic concept that it hurts to lose things, right?
Yeah, loss aversion is what that's called. And there's other studies on that, but that was one in particular. But understanding even when things went wrong, how they happened. Was it because we planned for some contingency in the briefing and the planning process? Was it because of one guy made one pivotal decision on his own that saved all of our asses? Make sure that you pick that stuff apart and figure out why. Once we have some basic consensus on the things that went right, the things that went wrong, and what we're going to do different in the future, the next big thing is what to do about them. How do you capture and track those things? And importantly, incorporate them into training and operations in the future. How do we avoid making the same mistakes over and over and over again?
Yeah, I learned from Mythbusters, the difference between science and screwing around is writing it down, right? One of my biggest pet peeves is watching people have to learn the same lessons over and over. Sometimes it's the exact same people making the exact same mistakes. That's a training problem, right? And at some point it becomes an evaluation problem. And sometimes there's a cluster of people who figured out the solution, and that solution only lives among that cluster of people, the little core cadre of, illuminated operators know how to fix this one problem. Maybe it's a software problem or a hardware problem or a tactics problem. And that information just kind of lives in their heads. I call that the Indian legend. Oh, well, you need to talk to Joe. He knows how to fix that. Well, why do I need to go talk to Joe? Why can't Joe write me an email or write us all an email and say, hey, here's the fix to that thing, right? So that can be as simple as an email. You send out a organization-wide email, say, hey, today I learned this. The fighter guys typically do a Friday afternoon. Everyone gets together and drinks a beer and takes shots for their mistakes. And if you messed up something, you get up in front of the squad and you say, hey, I screwed this up. I don't want you to screw it up too. I fried the hydraulics and here's why, or whatever, right? And then at some point, you need to take that from being an email, and instead of burying it somewhere in the shared drives or the shared folders or the SharePoint or the share Zoom call or the Google Drive, and you need to write it down in the manual, like the big main training manual. And yeah, maybe you can't cover every possible scenario, but if there's stuff coming up over and over and over, let's fix that. Let's fix that in training. That way guys aren't having to learn the same thing that their predecessors did.
And this isn't easy, right? You have to have, organizing this can be a task.
Yes. And writing is not easy for a lot of people.
Right. And also, do you write, whatever you write down, does it convey the actual like essence of what needed to be conveyed that was discussed in the debrief, right? And making sure that gets out to everybody, it's not an easy thing. And I mentioned earlier, sending out the after actions and emails as they come instead of just storing them in a file somewhere goes a long way in keeping that like on topic and relevant. But you also need to actively look for opportunities to implement stuff. And it might mean that like, you pencil that in for the calendar on the next training day. We're going to make sure that we hit X. That came up with us recently. We had a whole bunch of, a lot of our bread and butter stuff that we've been doing lately was not the traditional serving search warrants on structures. It was a lot of other going out and finding bad guys stuff that I'll spare the details for. But we found ourselves doing an old school breach and hold search warrant service and found that we were a little rusty on a couple things. And so guess what we're doing on Tuesday? some basic search warrant stuff. And so, yeah, making sure that you can organize a way that is actionable, I think is key in that. Another idea that I want to touch on that comes up in some of our debriefs is something that we, and I'm sure other people call it this too, but call the good idea fairy. And the good idea fairy recognizes that hindsight is 20/20, and it's easy to understand what we should have done now that we're sitting down and talking about it in hindsight. But what you don't want to do is be the guy or the gal who like watches the train wreck and had a good idea about how to prevent it.
So that's funny that you say that, because in my community, we define good idea very differently. So
there's kind of two definitions.
Yeah, there's like the guy in planning who's like, ooh, maybe we should all wear like pink tutus when we go out on the mission. Like,
that's actually coming.
Yeah.
So one good idea fairy is, one version of it is, you go to the debrief and you're like, yeah, we should have done this. Like after something went south. And it's like, okay, guy with the great idea, like, why didn't you say so then?
Yeah, where were you? Yeah.
Right, exactly. The other version is exactly what you're alluding to, Jim, which is, I have an idea. And this is something that, kind of like in the debrief, we talked about the leaders in the room should encourage that, should facilitate people speaking up and bringing their ideas forward, right? And we'll be on a dynamic operation that keeps changing on us, and we'll all be sitting in a truck or a car somewhere bouncing all these ideas. Oh, well, we could do this, or we could try it this way, or we could do it another way. And at some point, the team leader, like, who's dealing with his phone ringing, two radios going off, the peanut gallery in the back of the vans talking about all this stuff. And I know, because I'm usually that guy. I talk enough as it is, right? Coming up with all these good ideas. Well, maybe we could tunnel underground and be like the Ninja Turtles and pop up in the, like, okay, guy, like, let's slow things down a little bit.
Thanks for your advice. I'll take that under advisement. Off we go.
Exactly. And the reason I want to bring it up is kind of twofold. And it's appreciating the dynamics that everyone brings to the table. So the guys in the room that are coming up with all the good ideas, first of all, you should do that. Your ideas are valuable and you should speak up, right? And you certainly don't want to be the guy that could have stopped the bad outcome but didn't. So don't be that guy. That's a problem. If you have a solution, then you need to speak up and make it happen. And there's going to be times where you can't, and I'll come back to that. But if you have the opportunity to fix it, then do.
I've got a thing on this, and this goes beyond debriefs, but just a concept is don't bring your boss a problem without a solution, right?
Yep.
That's a basic professional thing that's true whether you work at a supermarket or you work at a SEAL team. And bosses love options. Hey, boss, I know you have this problem. These are 3 things I think you can do about it. I did some research, and this is the good answer, and here's why. How much more powerful is that than, hey, have we thought about this? Hey, have we thought about that? Hey, what about this? Hey, did you know there's rules that say we can't do what it is you're trying to do? Like, well, thanks, guy. Tell me what I can do, right?
Yeah. Yep. Agree. And, like I said, this is a two-way street because it goes back to understanding what your boss is going through. Voice your ideas, voice your concerns, by all means, bring solutions, but recognize that at some point, this is not a democracy. Crisis management is not democratic. It's just too inefficient, right? We can all be team players, but there's got to be a guy holding the bag, making the call. And when that happens, it's time to just go with it. And what you can't do at the end of the day is go in there and be like, I told you so, right? We should have done it my way. That should come up naturally in some way or another. But the whole point of this is understand that it's not easy to sit in that hot seat. And so I want team leaders and commanders and bosses and leaders to understand that it's important to hear those ideas. And we want to encourage that, right? Because in many cases, those good ideas have absolutely been the course of action that we take. But if you're the junior guy in the van, like say your piece, deliver it in a concise way, bring him a solution, not a problem, and then do what you're told, right? There's an important balance to strike there. And where I was going with this a few minutes ago when I said like sometimes this is going to come up in the debrief after the fact is there's a salesmanship thing where if you had an idea but you were still kind of I'm just not there yet at a point where I can really communicate or convey this. You could talk about it in the debrief, hey, I was thinking about this and this has been kind of eating at me. And at the time, I wasn't really sure how to communicate it or what the right course of action would have been. But now that I've had some time to kind of process, I think maybe in the future, this might have been a better solution, right? You can maybe talk about it in a way that, all right, I'm not saying that like, oh, you're stupid because I had this great idea and no one listened. You don't want to back yourself into that corner, right? But you could still probably talk about alternatives after the fact if you've thought of them. Another thing I think all debriefs need to touch on is the planning. And this is kind of the Good Idea Fairy builds on this a little bit because that some of that happens on the fly and some of it happens in an organized way. But one of the things we have to talk about is the capabilities and independent thoughts and actions of the team. So some groups and some people can handle a lot of decision-making on their own. And some groups and some people need a lot more direction and guidance. And I think that there's a lot to say about how you train and what sorts of decisions you allow your guys to make in training and operationally that will help you prepare for the unexpected stuff that could happen in real life. But it's important to make sure that when you're doing your mission planning or operational planning, that you're looking at those capabilities and giving those limits in a clear way to your guys.
I think a big part of that is are decisions being made at the right level, right? What decisions does your team leader get to make and what decisions does the chief have to make or whatever, and everyone in between? what decisions do we let the pilot of a plane make, and what do we have the Air Operations Center make? And sometimes those are very clearly delineated, right? And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're real squishy. But that's part of the point of the debrief is, hey, was the decision made at the right level? The go decision, for example, or the use of force decision. And then was the risk accepted at the right level? Who signed off on this? Was it the right, were we accepting way more risk than we really should have been accepting at our level, right? And that's part of the debriefing. The plan is, this is how much risk we thought we had, and this is how much we actually had. Did we even know that?
Another important way that this plays out is, at what point do we expect guys to stick to their assigned task or to be allowed to deviate from that task?
I think a big part of that is the recognition that we are off script, right? Things have gone sideways. And one of my key points about that is, did we know that things were sideways? Did everyone on the team know that things were going sideways? How long did it take for everyone to build their situational awareness bubble that we were now off script?
Yeah. And again, those are things that you can hit on in the plan and that you should pick apart in the debrief after the fact, that, hey, we probably should have planned for this or planned for that. And so part of that, having that kind of stack of scripts, or a playbook, if you will, right? If you think about being, the team leader or commander or whoever, being like the quarterback that takes you into this operation and says, hey, these are the plays that I can call. That's part of defining your objectives. And like I said earlier, there's times where you might go from objective has gone from a barricade to a hostage situation, and kind of having that intent down can help guys understand sort of where it's okay for them to take their own initiative and go off script, and where not to, if we're clear about those objectives.
Yeah. And a recurring theme that I want you to catch through all of this is that intent matters. Understanding what the intent was and will be in the future matters, right? And this is one of the reasons I think it's important when you debrief, get at least the tactical level boss in the room for a lot of these. One, because he or she needs to hear how it went and needs to understand kind of the ground truth of how it went. And two, because that's their opportunity to teach the organization what their left and right limits are, what their intent is, so that the next time you go out, you have a clearer picture of what it is they're trying to get you to do. So you don't have to stop and ask permission. You don't have to stop and clarify. You can operate with all that cool Boydian harmony and rapidity and initiative stuff. That's what we want for that competitive advantage.
This happened to me one time. We were dealing with a guy who was barricaded in a car. And so I heard a new phrase recently. We sat in a class from a guy from another agency that taught us a really cool class. And one of the things we talked about was the difference between a bad guy in a box and a sad guy in a box. Just really like those expressions. So I felt compelled to use them here. Bad guy in a box, right? Bad guy in a box, barricaded in his car, and we're going to assist him out of the car with the use of chemical irritants and the like. And so my job there is, like, when he does come out, if he's not surrendering, I have a dog to go and catch the guy if he tries to run away. And in the positioning of this, at one point, the team leader at the time was gesturing with his hand in a way that I interpreted to mean I needed to move to that side. And at the time, it's like it was a cloud of gas. So I couldn't see where the guy was, if he was coming out of the car or what. So I started to move that direction. And it turned out he was telling someone else to move over there, not me. And I ended up in a bad spot. And I ended up farther away from the bad guy than I should have been. So sure enough, he came out. He got hit with a bunch of less lethal, turned, ran the other direction. I had to go around another car, send the dog. We caught the guy. All was well. But the point there is that, like, having him in the room for that debrief was important, because he was pretty pissed off that I wasn't where he wanted me to be. And I got confused about the hand gesturing under gas masks, thinking that was referring to me when it wasn't. And so making sure that, like, okay, I could have asked a clarifying question. He could have been clearer in who he was speaking to. Miscommunication, it's fine, right? Like it's over with, it's done with, but we both learned in that scenario. But I think it kind of speaks to your point.
I think that's
there.
a good point.
So lots of things to process here in terms of making your debriefs and your after actions good and effective. A couple points I want to talk about as far as bad debriefs go. I've been to some debriefs facilitated externally by other people, and one of the things that I really rubs me the wrong way is when we all get together and we talk about what we had and what we did, and it's like, does anyone have anything? Like, hey, so-and-so did a really good job with this, and so-and-so did a really good job this, and then this happened, and that happened. And man, great work, guys. You guys, I thought everyone did really well. Does anyone have anything? It's just a big circle jerk.
Yeah,
we're not accomplishing anything there.
That to me sounds like a warning sign, right? That there is something in the relationship that keeps us from having candid conversations, right? And without getting too schmoopy, like that should concern you when everyone is sitting around the table at dinner and no one's talking. Or, how's your day? Fine. Right? You don't want that. You want to have a good enough rapport with the other agencies that if someone messed up, you can say so. And I think one of the ways you get there is fessing up to your own agency's error or errors. That doesn't mean you have to air your dirty laundry to everyone. And I think there's always some concern with that. But the more you train together, the more you work together, the more you go to Applebee's together after the op and you build that rapport, the easier it is to have that non-circle jerk debrief. The other thing I see a lot with that style is all you get is a play-by-play. You know, they basically read off the timeline. First this happened, then this happened, then this happened. I don't think anyone really gets anything from that, right?
Nope.
So all debriefs should be like a skirt. Long enough to cover everything, but short enough to be interesting. That's what you're shooting for. And if you're just reading off the timeline, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, it has to be critical to be effective. And one of the things, as far as like if you're ever participating in one of these circle jerk debriefs, one of the most disarming things that you can do within that group is be the one to initiate that level of ownership where you start owning your own mistakes like that, right? And if you say like, a lot of times you can kind of do this in a way that might like bring attention to someone else's errors, but accept responsibility for it yourself. And what I have found is like, hey, I realized that X, Y, and Z wasn't happening. I thought about it too late. I should have said something that was on me. I recognize that this was happening, but I failed to communicate that. And then you might find that someone else says, actually, I should have caught that. I was in that position.
Yeah.
That was my fault. And then suddenly, you know, we're having a more realistic conversation.
Yeah. And there's a classy way you can do that and a passive aggressive way you can do that. And you have to have the social awareness to do that well. You can't be like, so when the Navy SEAL was calling fire on his own position, I messed up the radio call to tell him that. Like, you're not helping anything, bub. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly a balance in all things.
That said, you're not doing any favors by ignoring the guy or the unit that is screwing up by not telling him that they screwed up, right? If they mess something up, you do need to tell them. There's a classy way to do it. You can, follow some protocol if it's across agencies or across teams, have the bosses talk. But you have to do it. And sometimes that has to be a courageous conversation.
Yeah, courageous conversation is a good way to put it. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the key starting points for having those conversations is explaining the impact it has for you. So a communication one that we deal with a lot as a canine guy that is typically out there helping patrol is I have certain criteria, certain boxes I have to check before I can call this person, before I reach the level of I can use a canine to apprehend them, right? Before I can dog bite this person. And, we're talking more serious levels of crime, usually something involving violence or a tendency for violence or weapons, Certain things about their behavior might help me justify that. Those things have to be communicated to me before I can justify sending the dog to go grab a guy. And there have been times where like I'm a guy's running away from me and I just have to try to chase him down myself because I can't drop the leash just yet. And I found in debriefs, if I explain that, hey, just so you know, guys, our uses of force are very heavily scrutinized. There's no such thing as a dog bite that doesn't get looked at closely and result in injury, and they're not usually pretty. And so there are certain things that I need to know before I can justify sending the dog. For example, A, B, C, D. These are the things that I need to know. If you can explain it in a way that makes it relevant to you, then you'll find people will kind of nod their head and be like, okay, I need to try to get that stuff out there so that I can arm that little furry weapon, the fur missile, and put him in play, right? Because otherwise he might as well just stay in the car. And the last thing is, yeah, we want you to bring attention to people's mistakes when they earn it, and it's got to be critical to be effective. Those are important aspects of a good debrief, but what we don't want to do is get into the habit of just second guessing people for sport and doing the Monday morning quarterback thing.
Yeah, that gets old. Throwing spears gets old. And the thing I'd highlight with that is it's about relationships. That might sound schmoopy, but that's the world we live in, right? We are social animals. We have to work as a team. And when people feel like every time they walk in a debrief, they're just going to get crapped on, that is not a positive, healthy environment, right? They need to go in prepared to learn. They need to go in prepared to own their mistakes. And I think if you're honest and forthright and you demonstrate a high give a shit factor when you're talking to people, they're going to react to that. They're going to relate to that. And that you're going to get the higher performing team, which is what you want, because you want to win. And that's how you get there. So go into every debrief with some organization. You don't have to have a script. You don't have to have the checklist that you're ticking off, but have some concept of what are the key lessons, what actually happened, where did we go wrong, what were the causes, what were the contributing factors to the things that went wrong, and what was your piece of that. And I think if you go in with that, you're going to have good debriefs, good after action reviews, and an overall more effective program.
Yeah, my big takeaways are just recognize the shoes that other people are in. If you've never had to be an air support guy, don't be critical of the air support guy not understanding how difficult his job can be. If you've never had to be the team leader, I'm telling you right now, that job is harder than it looks. And I've never done that job officially. I've been assigned as a team leader in training for stuff, and it's a challenge, right? And so you don't want to be too critical of your team leaders. You don't want to be too critical of the senior guys or the new guys or your peers in a group. You need to have an attitude that is constructive for everybody. And I think one of the biggest things you can do to set yourself up for success is put your money where your mouth is in terms of wanting to get better and wanting to be effective and build trust and communication, because it goes a long way in being part of a team that can perform at that level. So I think that's all I got. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor and carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Berry and watermelon happen to be my favorite flavors. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to get it for you.
This episode is also brought to you by Manus X. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching, and a debrief. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices to track your movements while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a shooting drill, and it coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. You can find them on manusx.com. And one thing I would highlight off of this is different personalities take coaching differently. And maybe you need the actual raw data. You need to see what exactly you were doing with the trigger. You need to see, the example I use for personalities is like, if you're the type of guy who likes to track your gym workouts on a spreadsheet, you're going to love what you get from Manus X.
Yep. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we do, and you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money is going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you can email info@tacticaltangents.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. If you go over to Facebook, we've got a podcast discussion group on the groups tab on our page. Make sure you join that. It'll ask you a couple questions to make sure that you are not a robot. And that's all we got. Jim, anything else?
Yeah, just want to plug Patreon again. Get on there. If you can throw us $1 or $2, that'd be awesome. Ever since we got defunded on OnlyFans, we got to get what we can on Patreon. Thanks.
That's right. All right. Good talk.